Okay, thank you all for being here today, especially on this crummy day. My name is Tom Higgins. I'm a 22-year Chelsea resident. I live with my wife Mandy on Madison Street, and I'm an Ease the Day volunteer here at the Senior Center, as is she. And a funny story is today, as we were leaving our house, I said, "We're gonna walk, right?" And Mandy said, "It's raining outside." And I said, "It's not raining, it's fine. It's not." I looked outside, it's not raining. So she goes, "Okay." And we start walking, and it rained all the way here. Just another reminder to listen to Mandy when making some big decisions. I'm a naturally curious person. I love to ask questions and get to know the story behind a person, and that's really what Time Travel with Tom is all about. And so, let me introduce you to today's guest. About 11 years ago, today's guest took a class titled Your Life as a Story. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So please join me in welcoming Paul Barden. Thank you, Paul. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
So you shared with me that you're going to share your story, not to the present, but it's from the early beginnings to when you turned 21 or so.
Exactly. You know, that's as far as we go today.
Okay. And so before we dive into that story, why don't you give us a little bit of information about your Chelsea story, what you do, where you're active in?
I was born in Hudson and grew up in Adrian, and we moved to Ann Arbor in 1984 after a couple other stops. But since I moved here in '84, I never really worked even in Washtenaw County. I was working for an automotive supplier. I had an office out by the airport, but the plants were in Mississippi, Georgia, and Mexico, so that's where I spent most of my time. Well, actually, for the next 25 years, I flew somewhere 25 weeks a year, so I wasn't here. But when I retired, Joy and I built a house in Style Township. We've been there for 25 years now. And I joined the Chelsea Adult Learners right after I retired. And I was on the board for, I think, 8 years. I was in charge of AV for the presenters and speakers. And I did that right up until the time of COVID, and then it kind of went south. And also in the last 6 or 7 years, I joined the Chelsea Senior Center and started playing pickleball with the Chelsea Pickleball Club. So I got to know people that way. So that's kind of how I'm connected to Chelsea and the Chelsea Senior Center. And that's the background, I guess, for this story.
Okay, great. By the way, does anyone in the audience, have they grown up in Adrian or know Adrian really well? So we're gonna talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Maybe one of your first memories, or I guess I should call it the first time you drove a car.
Right, well,
Maybe you want to start there?
from this class that I took, over time I kept writing these stories, and you get a collection, and so at some point I said, well, I'll give the collection a name, and the name of the collection is Let's Go for a Ride. And so my very first memory, when I was really just 4, my memory of this is 30 seconds, but my brother and I were sitting in the driveway in my dad's car. I was behind the steering wheel, my brother was in the passenger side, and I said, "Where do you want to go?" And he said, "Well, let's go to Bill Jenkins." Well, I'll come back to that. So we fooled around, and the next thing you know, I guess I got it into neutral. The car backed down the driveway, down the hill on the Addison, which is a side street, then made a 90-degree turn on the Maumee Street, which is one of the 2 main streets of Adrian.
Busy street.
Yeah, in the middle of the street. So that's all I remember. But the rest of the story I can tell because my mother told it many times. And I was 4, my brother was 3, climbed over the playpen or play yard fence, got into the car, rolled down the driveway. The lady next door, Mrs. Betts, saw it happen, came and got my mother. She rescued us. Nobody got hurt, the car didn't get hurt, and that's the beginning of the story.
We'll continue the story with your life.
Well,
partners involved.
Yeah, from there, not more than 3 or 4 months later, we were living in Adrian, and the time had come that my grandparents had a farm east of Adrian, and they wanted to retire. My father was the only son, so we moved to the farm, they moved to town. The house was an 1880s Italianate, 5-bedroom, 10-foot ceilings, whole furnace, one register in the middle of the house kind of place. And we were there not more than 3 or 4 months after that when my mother got tuberculosis. And she was away at the TB sanatorium in Howell for a year and a half. So at that point, my grandparents moved back to the farm. They took over everything. My dad kind of took a step back. And at that point, although my brother and I played somewhat, I gravitated towards my grandfather. He became my best friend for the next several years. And in those first years, well, actually, when we were still just he and I on the farm, I'd tag along with him and help feed the livestock. And in the evening, he and I would play checkers. And I remember watching Friday night fights with him with the Timex watch and John Cameron Swayze and that business. And then pretty much every morning of the week, under the pretense of going to town to do some errands, I would go with him. And I don't know if he always had errands, but what we always did was go to the Tip Top or the Main Stop or some diner, have a piece of pie and a cup of coffee and chat with whoever was there. Another thing he and I did probably once a week in those days, he at that time had the trash business contract for Acre. So he had, I'll come to more of that story, but one of the things he and I did as part of that was once a week we'd back up the pickup truck to the Kroger store and we'd collect all the expired produce. So lettuce, bananas, apples, and all that kind of stuff. We'd take it back to the farm and the pigs didn't really mind that it was expired. So that was part of the story. The other thing he did almost every single afternoon was drive over to the garbage farm, or the trash farm, the dump, where all this stuff went after the guys picked it up. And I always went with him over there. And the thing that was really memorable about that is the guys that picked the garbage, called garbage pickers in those days, lived on this farm. And it was like I'm going to say a 4,000 square foot kind of a pole barn, tar paper shack, divided into 4 apartments, and the garbage pickers and their families lived in this one big thing. It was divided into 4 apartments, but it was, cement floor, and it was pretty basic. And I got to know these guys. I mean, there was One-Eye Leonard and Hunchback Benny and Bill with the vicious German Shepherds. And I got to know some of the kids. And I remember a kid named Ronnie, and I remember we went into this building once to get a drink of water or something, and I was, it's still in my memory of what that looked like, and it was pretty basic. And then the thing that I really, both my grandfather and I learned to love is on Saturdays, he and I would go to the livestock auction in Dundee, which is a big deal. He'd take over some pigs to sell, and in the morning we'd look to see if there was anything to buy later. And we go up and have the roast beef with mashed potatoes and brown gravy dinner. And then what follows that is what else but the matinee. So we all file into the amphitheater for the auction. And most of the farmers, as you would expect, are big overalls and speed caps and that kind of thing. But my grandfather had a different self-image. And I'm going to actually send this around. There's a couple of pictures here. I wanted you to have a picture in your mind of what these grandparents looked like, because when they took over the farm, they were kind of all business people. During the Depression, my grandfather had grown up. He was not the oldest son, so he didn't inherit the farm. So he started out in the 20s as a horse trader. He traded work horses and race horses. And by the time he got to the end of the 20s and early 30s, he had established somehow some connections and started a road building business and got contracts through the government WPA. So that's what he did all through the 30s, right up until the beginning of World War II. So you have a picture of what these grandparents looked like. This is my grandfather, my father, my grandmother, and this is my grandfather. So anyway, these were serious people. And when we walked into the auction, he didn't wear overalls. He had on starched work pants, suspenders, and a 2 3/4 inch snap brim Stetson. He looked the part. So anyway, at the bottom of the amphitheater is the place where the livestock comes in and exits. And back of that is where the auctioneer sat. It was his friend Paul Linehan from Adrian, and he was a snappy guy too. And he was up there. He had a dark suit, white shirt, bolo tie, and he was sounded like, "Well, all right, now what do you want to get? I got a $30, give me $40 bill, give me $50 bill, sold that hog for $50 bill," and that was just forever my favorite thing. And that was the first record I ever bought in the late 50s, and I still listen to it sometimes on YouTube. So,
The record that you listen to often is an auctioneer?
it's called The Auctioneer Song. It's by a guy named Leroy Van Dyke from the late 50s, and you can still hear it. You can Google it and hear it today if you want. So that was the things that why I considered him my best friend in those days. And on a sad note, I guess you see a picture of my grandmother. She was born in 1890. She was a suffragette, a prohibitionist, daughter of American Revolution, and a Christian Scientist. And the sad ending to this story is when I was 12, my grandfather was shoveling corn into a corn elevator, cut his hand, did not get a tetanus shot because of their Christian Science beliefs, and 3 weeks later died of lockjaw. And that's the grandparent story.
You know, I was going to ask you about the Christian Scientist influence in your family, because I heard this negative story earlier, but I also read that you said one of the things that Christian Scientist teaches, like, keep moving forward.
Well, if you're from that era, there was the power of positive thinking. I forget
That's what it is.
And they were connected to that concept, and it rubbed off on me, certainly.
I think you said to me, it taught you that you could do anything.
Yeah, that was the attitude. You know, there's a lot of criticism at these days, but as a 7 or 8 year old, it made an impression.
So the medical intervention was negative, and
It just didn't do anything. They believed that it would just be all right.
so one of my questions was going to be, how was your grandpa your best friend? And you told us.
Those are the things that we did together. And there were, especially when I lived on the farm for the first year and a half, there weren't any neighbor kids. And my brother and I had limits to what we did together, and my grandfather was a lot of fun.
So your dad, you described as a colorful fellow.
Well, yes.
And I want to make sure, you described his arms like Popeyes or something?
Well, there's a picture of him here, and there's a reason why he's at Howell Military School. Growing up in the 30s and all this road building business, he changed school every year and became kind of a juvenile delinquent, didn't like it. So he ended up in military school, and he learned some discipline, but he went there as kind of a juvenile delinquent. He had an attitude, and he carried that through into his adult life. And in those years, he didn't want to take over the farm, but he didn't want a 40-hour-a-week job either. So what ended up happening is he worked on the farm with my grandfather. He did the hard stuff in the spring and the fall, and he also ran a little sand and gravel business because there was that available on this garbage truck. So that's what he was doing. But what happened a lot, my brother and I were no more than 6, 7. He would knock off earlier in the afternoon, say 4 o'clock, and go into town. And before we were 6 or 8 years old, my brother and I had been in every dive bar in Adrian. Silver Dollar, Club 109, DC Club. And of course, as I mentioned in the very first story, where do you want to go? Bill Jenkins. And that was the most famous bar in Adrian. And it was this book, it was a place like out of a novel or a Dickens novel or something. It was a combination gas station, party store, and bar, all in one big 1930s building. And Bill Jenkins himself sat behind the cash register in the party store and cashed everybody's check on Friday night, which meant a lot of cash. And everybody in Adrian also knew they had a double-barrel shotgun underneath the counter, and he never had any trouble. But the bar itself, my dad would take us in there, and you know, like for happy hour, 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. My brother and I would have a Coke, and we'd watch these people drink beer and smoke cigarettes and listen to the jukebox. And we were in all these bars. Yeah, when we were in grade school. When he walked into a bar, by the time he was an adult, he was 5'9", 230 pounds. And when he walked in the door, he tipped his cap, and people said, "Here comes Freddie." And he played pool for big money, and people always paid because they knew they had to.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Yeah.
You said your dad never really associated with anyone respectable.
That was true until I left Adrian. Then I think during those years my mother didn't drink, she didn't go to bars, so that was a point of contention. But after I left Adrian, they got their heads together and they joined the Moose and the VFW, whatever, and got a little more respectable. But these guys at the bars, the dive bars, were, you know, tough people.
That's funny. That's great.
So I'm not sure where else.
Well, wherever you go,
Well, my dad, in spite of, he wasn't maybe the best dad of all time, but he did things to help us stand up for ourselves. If you don't complain about a bully, just handle it. By the time I was 10, my brother and I both knew how to load and fire the .22 rifle. I was driving a tractor by then. I wasn't driving straight enough to plant corn, but I could spread manure. And here's a story that tells you what I mean about standing up for yourself. I was probably 3rd or 4th grade. I went downtown Adrian after school on my bike to get a haircut. And I'm sitting in the front chair, Clark Wilson's shop, and I look out the front window, and here's this guy, Orman Wimberly, from my school, riding off on my bicycle. So I walked home, and I said, well, Dad and I are going to get in the car, we're going to go get this bike. Well, he looked at me and said, I want you to walk back down there and get your bike. There's no discussion, just do it. So I walked back down there, down this hill, kind of a tough neighborhood, next to the Raisin River and a tomato canning factory. And I walked down there, and there's my bike sitting right in front of Orman Wimberly's house behind a chain link fence. So I took a deep breath, I walked in and I got the bike. And the funny thing about it is, I don't know if I was just lucky, or did my dad call the house and say, my son's coming, or did Orman's dad know who my dad was and said, Orman, you made a mistake. In any event, that he did things like that to help you establish self-confidence and take care of yourself.
So you spent a lot of time at the farm, kind of running wild. Describe
Yeah, well, all through my grade school years, my dad was working there, so Saturdays we'd be there, and during the summertime we'd be there 2 or 3 days a week to get away from so my mother has a little peace. But that's what I guess the other side of that, those years started. Because when my mother came out of the TB sanitarium, she says, well, I didn't grow up on a farm, I don't want to be a farmer's daughter. So we moved back into Adrian, and the grandparents stayed on the farm for the rest of their lives. So then the Adrian story started.
Can you describe something called Happy Days?
Well, that's when my mother came out, I was ready to start kindergarten. And it was one of these blocks or one of these streets in Adrian where every other house had some kids or somebody you could talk to. And 2 doors to our east was mom and pop grocery store. We went probably 3 or 4 days a week. And it was Dick and Ruth Damon. Dick was in the back, he was a butcher. He'd go back there and say, Dick, I need half a pound of pickled pimento, and then you check out in the front with Ruth, and your Wonder Bread, and maybe a few pieces of penny. Yeah, pickled pimento has bologna with pickles. I don't know. And you can buy penny candy, but anyway. And then across from Damon's was Noveski's sporting goods store. And I go in there maybe a couple times a month and buy fishing line and fishing hooks, because a block west of us was a fishing pond. But he was just he and I, and he'd say, "What are you catching down there?" So, I caught the sunfish the other day, and it was a whopper. He was a humorous guy. And then 2 doors west of us was our babysitter, Betty Burlingame, and she was a full-figured girl, and so was her mother. And they were both members of the Salvation Army. They both wore uniforms. And sometimes on Saturday night, she was babysitting. My brother and I would end up going to the Salvation Army with them, and that was memorable because they had the brass band and the rally and honored Christian soldiers and all that. And all my life, I had a spot in my heart for the Salvation Army, and I've donated, and even in the last 10 years, I've rung the bell at Christmas time because it's made an impression on me. But the first really good friend I had when we moved into Adrian was a guy named Eddie Holmes. And Eddie was a natural-born bad boy. And two short stories. When we were probably 7 or 8, we did the fair. In those days, the fair was in September. We got Tuesday afternoon off from school to go to the fair. So Eddie's mother dropped us off in front of the fair, and she said, "I'm going to meet you back here at 4 o'clock. Don't be late." So here we are, 7 years old, 8 years old. Eddie said, "I don't think we should have to pay to get in here." So we walked down the tracks and back to the where they sell the coal yard, and back of the horse barn. Of course, we climbed over the 8-foot fence, and we no sooner hit the ground, and we heard the security guy say, "Hey, you kids." So we all scattered, and of course we got away, but we looked over our shoulder. But the story I told on growing up in Adrian Facebook a few times, or once, and got a lot of response, was next door to Eddie and Bill's house. And Bill was Eddie's brother. Was a factory. It was called Stubman's Green Spring. We called it Stubby's. And we would go over back to Stubby's with our wagons, load up 30 pounds of scrap iron each, pull the wagons 3 blocks south to the front yard of Fred Case. And Fred Case had a scrap business operating out of his front yard. So we go down there, he gives a penny a pound for our scraps, so we had 30 cents. Go right back the way we came. There was an Adrian Dairy across the street from Stubby's. You go in and get a double dip ice cream cone for 15 cents. 15 cents in your pocket when you got home, and it was a good day's work. And that was the Eddie story.
You were 7, 8, or
yeah.
anything?
Yeah. And I posted this on the Adrian Facebook, and we weren't the only kids that did that.
So you said to me, or I read in your story, that you may have been a troublemaker in kindergarten.
Yeah, but that's a very short. My parents came, or my mother came to talk to the teacher, and I got the message. We were turning somersaults when we were supposed to be napping, and we were going down the forbidden big slide and that kind of thing. Ending the long story short, Eddie flunked kindergarten.
You were quite that bad. I do want to hear about the sewer story. I don't know if that's now or later.
Well, a couple years after these Beecher Street stories, my mother inherited a little bit of money, and I'm going to come to work, how she was a nurse, and so she became county health nurse for Lenawee County, and so she had this job, she had the inheritance, she bought a house on College Avenue, we moved there. Well, my brother made friends right away with the kid next door named Chuck, and they got into a lot of stuff, and they discovered that at the back of our yard there was a grate on top of the storm sewer. So naturally, let's see what's down there. They take the storm sewer grate off, and I look down there with their flashlights, and you can see it's a big pipe. It's like 4.5 feet high. So next thing you know, they got their flashlights, they dropped down in there, and my friend Terry and I are there too. So the 4 of us with our flashlights well, let's see where this goes. So we went 2 blocks north, found another grate, lifted it off. So, oh, this is Eddie Christensen's yard. And then we went 2 blocks east of there, and oh, this is Dave's yard.
Oh, you pop up?
Yeah, just lift it up and say, oh, I recognize this yard. And then we went 3 more blocks east, and then the pipe opened up on the side of the hill into the Kroger's parking lot, and that was the end of the trip. And I told that story on Facebook, and we weren't the only ones that ever did that kind of thing either.
I imagine you went down there more than one time.
No, I think parents got wind of it, and that was just that one time.
What an exciting adventure.
Memorable. And so that's a story that my brother kind of got us into. I'll tell you one more. When I was in junior high, I stayed overnight at my friend Lance's house. We were like 13 or 14, and we're laying around his house on a weekday, and his dad comes in and says, "I'm going to put you boys to work." So he took us downtown where he was about to demolish this old gas station. It's a Phillips 66 from the 30s. He gave us these sledgehammers and said, "Knock down some walls for me." Well, the place, we were at it all that first day and part of the next day, but it was built like a bunker, and I don't think we did much damage at all. So at noon the second day, we collected our pay, we went across the street, got a 15-cent hamburger at Burger Ranch, or whatever there was way before McDonald's. And then we went 2 blocks south. We thought we'd go into the Lenawee County Courthouse and maybe see a trial or something. Well, there was no trial, but on our way through the courthouse, we noticed that the janitor's door was open. And interestingly enough, at the back of the janitor's closet was another door. Well, let's see what's back there. So we walked through the second door, and it was this vast attic. It was an attic in the entire courthouse from one wall to the other, so maybe 50 feet square, a huge space. And in the middle of that space was a stairway that was kind of a switchback that went this way and that way and that way. It's all the way to the top. So, of course, we said, well, let's go up there. And the last 6 feet, there were no stairs. It was just a wooden ladder. So I went up first because you're going one at a time. And we went right up to the very top of that thing where you can see out. There's a glass dome. You can see 360 degrees. Well, that's great. And Lance did it. And then on our way out, before we got caught, I noticed these beer bottles over in the corner, and I said, I'm going to take souvenirs. And today, I still have these beer bottles in the windowsill next to the pool table in our rec room. And I had 3. This is one that I brought just to prove to you that I actually did this thing. But I think they're probably beer bottles that were left behind when the courthouse was built back in the 1880s. So those are the kind of things that we got into without supervision in those days.
That is great. I love that you have that souvenir of that experience. Okay, so you had said that you made a decision later in life you were going to make enough money, move out of Adria, and go to college. But while you were still a kid, what were you doing to make, besides the studies?
Well, that's right. I got to, I think, 7th grade. I was just saying, I'm going to go to college. I'm going to go to the big city, climb the ladder, and all that kind of stuff. But like all kids in those days, you got some kind of allowance, but it was never enough. So we all did kind of the jobs that kids do in those days. So actually, my first job was working at my grandfather's farm. We could go out there and do what looked like a lot of work, and at the end of the day, he'd give you $1. But the thing I got out of that was I worked and I got $1, and I learned the value of $1. Starting in junior high, I had, like a lot of kids, a paper route, and I didn't know which one I was going to get, delivering the Akron Daily Telegram until I got it. And then I turned out it was the worst neighborhood in Akron, and it included Bill Jenkins. But, so I had that for not too long, maybe 6 months or so. And then my brother and I figured out a better way is to sell papers on the Four Corners Sunday morning. So we did that. And we made as much or more money in 4 hours standing on the curb selling Sunday papers as you would making deliveries 6 days a week. So that was the next one. After that, my friends and I all went out to the One-Way Country Club and started as caddies. And we would carry 2 bags because you paid twice as much. We learned golf etiquette. And on Mondays, with caddies day, we walked 36 holes every week. Learned to play golf. And I'm still playing golf 61 years later. After golf, my friend Terry introduced me to some milkmen who needed extra help on the weekends because the stores and the customers wanted more milk on the weekends. So the first guy I had was John LaSalle. The only thing I really remember, this was the first one I had, is he picked me up Saturday morning at 3:30. We went down to the Glenway Dairy, loaded up all this milk in glass bottles, quarts and half gallons, and they were heavy. And after we delivered a little while, we always went and had breakfast at 5 a.m. And I was always amazed how many people ate breakfast at 5 a.m., but they were there. The next guy I had was Dewey Martin, and he had a country route, which took a lot longer. And the reason it took a lot longer is a lot of the housewives wanted to come out and have a chat with him and so forth. And finally, we got to this house, and Dewey says, I have to deliver inside here. I'll be gone for about 20 minutes.
Special delivery.
So that's, I don't even have to tell you the story. That's exactly what you're thinking. So those are the kind of jobs.
Okay. That's excellent. Just a small break. Does anybody have any questions for Paul before we continue? Anything at all? I was going to ask you about your athletic feats in junior high.
Well, this is a multi-year story that ends well, but and it's not just about school athletics and sports. I learned a lot of life lessons from this story. In 4th grade, I was like every other kid. I was looking forward to spring baseball tryouts, being on the Little League and all that stuff. Well, I got to the tryout, I couldn't hit the fastball, and that door closed right then. But a couple of years later, I was in 7th grade, and in the early spring, the gym teacher took the boys outside and said, today we're going to do a 6 block run, and that's what we did. And what happened is I finished behind Ray Eddy maybe 30, 40 yards. But the good news, I finished ahead of everybody else by 30, 40 yards. So the door opens, and a couple weeks later, I joined the track team. In 7th, 8th grade, you don't do a lot for track, but I remember coach he always took the new boys aside. He said, boys, track men are not like ball players. They don't have any bad habits. They don't drink. They don't swear. They eat right. They're clean cut, etc. And when you run track, it's not about lucky breaks. It's not about a good bounce or a bad bounce or a referee made a call or whatever. It's just you and 5 other guys. And the half mile is a 2-minute race. Quarter mile is a 1-minute race. Track meet once a week. So in order to race 3 miles in 3 minutes a week, you're going to train 6 hours a week. And I heard those words, and it didn't mean a thing to me at the time, but I remember the words. But I learned what it meant later on. And then in 9th grade, we got a new coach. His name was Paul Dunn. He just graduated from Denison, and he was gung-ho. He was a gym teacher. He had a paddle called Black Beauty, but I don't think he ever used that. He just scared me.
Paddle?
A paddle. All male teachers in those days had paddles. Some used them. He didn't. He just scared people with it. But funny thing, when boys came to gym class and they didn't have their gym shoes or whatever, he said, you go sit up there in the bleachers. And then he hung this sign on the bleachers that said leper colony. And you didn't want to be in the leper colony. But anyway, he was a little more of a track coach, and we actually jogged down to Island Park and did a workout on that old cinder block track. And at the end of that, which was my 9th grade year, which is still junior high, I ran a 56-mile or 6-second quarter mile, and that was a junior high record. So I said, well, I'm ready for high school. We started as 10th graders. So I walked out on that track spring in 10th grade, and I heard about Coach Hammerstein. He was a famous cross-country coach and famous for his workouts. So I walked up to that line the first day. He said, boys, step up to the line. Today we're going to run 20 quarter miles at 67 seconds. Well, if you've ever done anything like that, I didn't handle it that year. I stayed with it as best I could. My junior year started no better, and after about 3 weeks I said, that's it, I quit. And I quit for a couple days, and then Bud Rowley, who was the captain of the track team, captain of the football team, captain of the wrestling team, got me in the hall, challenged me to come back, challenged me to not be a quitter, and said the coach wants to have a meeting with you. So I went into Coach Hammerstein's classroom at lunchtime. I sat down. He said, I hear you want to quit. And I said, yeah, the training's too hard, and I'm not getting anywhere with this. And then he said, what's your goal? I never thought about it. I said, I'd like to break the school record in the half mile and run as much below 2 minutes as possible. Well, the record had been 2 minutes and 1 second for 6 or 8 years, so good goal. He said, well, I'll tell you what, you come back to the team, you do what you can. I'm going to give you a workout sheet every week, and eventually, if you follow these workouts, you might achieve your goal. So things didn't really, I came back, I eventually got mentally tough enough to run with the rest of the guys and do the workout. And that was kind of the way it went junior year. But I had one day, it was spring break my junior year. It was a beautiful spring day. We had a meet scheduled in Tecumseh. And I'm walking over to the high school to go to Tecumseh. And I bumped into Shirley Blade, who was a girl I'd been flirting with for a few weeks. And long story short, I missed the bus. And assistant coach Carrick was still there. He said, you know, if you can get yourself to Tecumseh, you can probably still be at this meet. So I called my mother at her office at the health department and borrowed her car, got to Tecumseh. And so it's the guy from Tecumseh, Terry Bolden, was the best time in the county. My friend Terry Bagel was second best, and I'm like 5th or 6th best time. So he ran this race, it's 2 laps around, coming out of the last turn. I said, Terry, let's go. And Terry went around the guy from Tecumseh, and I went around both of them, and that was the only race I won that year. And to make it an even better day, the last event of that track meet, or every track meet, is a mile relay. And I ran the last leg of that relay, and we won the relay, and we won the meet by 1 point. So that was the highlight of that year. Going into the senior year, come Christmas, I said, I'm going to do this goal. I'm going to make it happen. In January, I started running at the YMCA on the treadmill. February, I started running outdoors by myself, which people didn't run outdoors in 1969. I did it. First meet of the year, I ran a 2:02. I said, man, I could do this, I'm close. And then maybe a month later, we had a meet at East Lansing. And there was a guy there, Phil Wrigley, who had already run 154. I said, how does he do that? So I lined up next to him. And the way the normal kids had run that race, and still do for the most part, is they run in a pack until you get to the last 200 yards, and then everybody does the best they can. This guy took off from the start like he was running a 100-yard dash, ran the first lap in 55 seconds, the second in 59. That's 154. But the light bulb went on for me. I'd been running with the pack forever, and it wasn't working for me. So 2 weeks later, we're back at the same track for the conference meet, and I think I got it figured out. So I took off with this guy around a 55-second first lap, 63 second lap. Well, he still beat me, but guess what? 55 and 63 is 158. So it's 2 seconds below 2 minutes, and it's a school record. And again, to top it off, I ran the last leg of the mile relay, and we also set a school record with that. And what's interesting, this whole story lasts 6 years. And this was the last meet that I would ever have a chance to achieve the goal. If I didn't do it that day, there was no other opportunities. So that's the way that story ended. But lessons learned. One door closed, another door open. When you feel like quitting, your friends and your coaches, your mentors, get you through it. Accept it. Learn to run your own race. Run it the way it works for you, not the way everybody else is running it. And don't worry about beating it. Set a goal. Like, say it out loud, write it down, and then work to your goal. My goal was never to beat Terry Bakewell. My goal was to break the school record. And all through my life, I've learned that if you do the best you can do and let the chips fall where they may, that's a good approach to life. So that's a track story, but to me it's more than that.
That's very good. You mentioned to me that your mom came to that last meet.
My dad never came to a meet because he was disappointed that I didn't play baseball, but my mom finally came to that meet and did well.
I was going to talk about Saugatuck and then Mardi Gras.
Yeah, we might have skipped something, but it doesn't matter. We're
doing fine.
We got enough to finish up.
So you decided you were going to go to Michigan State, you were going to study accounting.
Well, this is before Michigan State.
You went there.
3-4 weeks after the last track meet, we graduated from high school, and friends of mine had heard about this music festival that was going to happen in Saugatuck over the 4th of July weekend. It was, that year, 4th was on a Friday, so the festival was Friday and Saturday. And this would have been 6 weeks before Woodstock. So we just decided to go. My dad lent us his 63 four-door Cadillac sedan, and we went over there. And about halfway to Saugatuck, we stopped at a place for breakfast, and it looked like Stivers. It was a big gravel parking lot, a big building. And while we were in there, we heard this loud roar outside, and there was a bunch of bikers, and we'd never really seen the bikers in the years. About 30 or 40 of them come in with their bell bottoms and their leather jackets and all that. It made an impression. But that was not the only time we were going to see them. Because we got to Saugatuck, and this place was on a little lake north of town, about 500 or 600 yards from Lake Michigan, but the dune was between us and the lake. So I'm here. I look like a track guy. I got the short haircut. I don't fit in at all. And there's 25,000 hippies here with long hair and bell bottoms and whatever. And I made the best of it. And, not much happened that first day. We were there. We all had our pup tents, and I think my friend Terry might have lost his virtue. But the second day, about right after lunch, the bikers showed up, and there was this, I don't know, 12-foot chicken wire fence around the whole thing, and they started yelling free concert. And the next thing you know, they tore down the fence and rode the bikes in, and it was a free concert. And this was a festival with, Bob Seger, Ted Nugent, Motor City 5, Edie and the Stooges, all the Michigan bands were there, and Procol Harum, a couple others. So anyway, settled down, and then as I was getting towards sunset, and the stage faced east and the crowd faced west, looking towards the dune, towards Lake Michigan. And as the sun was starting to set, there were 3 or 4 Jeeps on the top of the dune, and there were guys with shotguns standing beside these Jeeps. And the idea is they didn't want the festival people to climb over the dune and go into Lake Michigan and climb onto their property. So what happened was, of course, the bikers didn't like that image, and they started climbing up the dune. And before they could get to the top, the Jeeps and the shotguns took off. And that was the first time I ever heard Power to the People. And you heard it loud for quite a while. That was the way that whole event ended, was the crowd going wild with this Power to the People.
That was exciting, not scary at all.
We had a dramatic minute,
Yeah.
because I didn't know if the Jeeps were going to leave or not.
Good, we can get some water.
No, I got it.
So Mandy and I went to New Orleans in December, and we enjoyed a lot of music and great food. It was, and we drank a little bit while we were there too. But we said to ourselves throughout that long weekend, I can't imagine being here at Mardi Gras. And I said this to Paul, and he goes, I got a Mardi Gras story for you. So, please share that.
Well, I have been to New Orleans 6 or 8 times in my life. The first time, I was sitting in my dorm room at Michigan State sophomore year, I don't know, maybe late March, early April, and my friend Joel Heiser from Aiken, who I played football with, called me up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and said, we should go to Mardi Gras. So at 4 o'clock, we were in his 65 GTO, headed to New Orleans with 2 of his fraternity brothers. And of course, we made bad decisions. We started drinking beer before we got out of East Lansing. And got pulled over in Sylvania, Ohio by a state trooper. And Joel had to get out and walk the line and prove he was not drunk.
And was that not so uncommon to have a beer while you're driving?
Well, for better or for worse, cops didn't really enforce it much in those days. You could get away with a lot of stuff. But amazingly, the state trooper said, boys, I'm going to let you go, but I don't want you to take any more until you get to New Orleans. And that's what we did. So we got down there, and Joel had set it up for us to go to his fraternity house in Tulane. And we took a shower, and we were going to sleep there. And so we went from there to Bourbon Street. And we had no plan B, no cell phones. And of course, what happened was I got separated from the other 3 guys. And it got to the point late at night that I got some newspapers and I laid down on a park bench next to the Mississippi and went to sleep. And of course, when I woke up in the morning, my wallet was gone. So I went over to, what's the park? Jackson Square. Yeah, Jackson Square. And found a Salvation Army place that was handing out sandwiches. So I had a couple of sandwiches and hung out on the square all day long to watch people frisbee and smoke dope and whatever. And about 9 o'clock that night, I went back down to Bourbon Street and amazingly enough, found my friends. And they said, oh, we're really glad to see you. I said, why are you glad to see me? I said, well, we all were drunk and disorderly and had to spend all our money to get out of jail. So between the 4 of us, we had like maybe $10 and a gas credit card, which carried us through for one more day of partying somehow. I can't tell you how. And
what were you guys drinking, doing drugs, both?
Well, we were really just drinking. Well, if you haven't been or if you ever go, just drink beer. Don't drink any hurricanes. Yes. That's for sure.
For hand grenades.
But I'll tell you this. This is 1969. Times were changing. Or this is 71 actually. And I bumped into a guy from high school that I hadn't seen in a while. Just totally at random. This first night where I was lost. And he put something in my hand, and I guess what it was later was a little speck of hash. And I immediately popped it in my mouth, which was a huge mistake. But I don't think it did a thing for me because I was already a mess. But things you do when you're young. So anyway, and I've been there many times since then, and there's a lot of different ways to see New Orleans that are not that crazy, but we're all way too old to do Mardi Gras, I guarantee you that. One part of my story, I don't know how we skipped it, but and I got 5.
Go for it.
The other story from my grade school days that I somehow skipped over was when we were in grade school, my mother, who was from Missouri, had put herself, she was the second of 8 children, and during the Depression she put herself through nursing school, graduated valedictorian, and so that's who she was. And in grade school she wanted to take us to Missouri to see her family and learn a little bit about what that was about. So we took the Wabash Cannonball from Adrian to St. Louis, and then from there on another train to Grandma's house. But in those days, the train, the Wabash Cannonball, was still old school. It had, we went to the dining car, it had white linen tablecloths, pewter silverware, waders and white jackets. We made a depression, and we did that twice. One time I missed a train and had to stay over in St. Louis, which was not fun. But another time we rode one way, and my dad came out, and he was going to, we'd all go back in the car. So he was there. Well, my grandparents, I never knew them very well, but they had 8 children. First one 1915, the last one 1939. And after the 8th kid, my grandma said, "That's it." My grandfather went to the basement and slept there for the rest of his life. Seriously. My grandma was this, I don't think she ever had any adventures. What she did every single day of her life was go to Mass at 6 a.m., come home and make bread. And that was pretty much the highlight of her day. My grandfather, Paul Lubensky, one named after him, he and his brother ran a slaughterhouse and a butcher shop in the 30s and 40s. And then when I got there in the 50s, he had a bar downtown called Paul's Place. Served no liquor, just beer and wine, and no women ever. My dad took my brother in there a few times, and it was kind of a dark place with an overhead fan. No, I recommend it. Write down your memories, write 2 or 3 pages at a time, over time. I probably have, I think I told you, close to 200 pages of stuff that I've written over the last 12 years. Not just about me, but what I remember about all my family and so forth. So it's a good collection to have, and it helps you clarify your memories and think about what happened to you.
Any final message that you want to share?
I don't know. I don't think so.
By the way, Mandy and I are going out of town next month, so we won't be here.
Oh, the other thing I wanted to tell you about, I forgot about this. This coach I had in high school for track, he and I stayed in touch the rest of his life. He had Michigan football tickets. He and I went to many football games together. I visited him in Adrian when I was there. And this story I told you about track, I wrote that down maybe 6 or 8 years ago, and I mailed it to him. And he called me the next week. We talked about how much he liked it and what a great experience it was. And then when he died 2 or 3 years ago, I went to his funeral, and his daughter read that whole story at the funeral. It was like the story of the funeral. He left coaching shortly after I graduated for some bad reasons, but that was his passion in life, and it was cut short. So anyway.
That's pretty sweet that you shared that memory.
Yeah.
Well, Paul Barden, it has been great getting to know you.
Yeah, good fun. Good fun.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Dave.
Well, I have a question. So, how long have you been married, and how did a bad boy like you meet your wife?
Well, Joy and I have been together 31 years. Her first husband was her childhood sweetheart from Manchester. He was a high school star there, and unfortunately he died during bypass surgery when he was 52. So she has 4 children from that. This is my second marriage. My first wife I met at Michigan State, and this is when I had no idea what marriage was about. I had this plan about graduating and going up the ladder and all these things. So I married Nancy Rafferty, who grew up on the main line in Philadelphia, and she fit the picture. And we're still friends today. When we go out to dinner or have a family party or even go on vacation, she's always part of the party. So it's worked out that way. But I have 2 sons from that marriage that were both went all the Ann Arbor schools and Ann Arbor sports. And, that's our marriage stories.
Even the bad boys get it.
Not bad.
Much better.
Anything else?
I forgot to tell him about what happened with the guy Eddie Holmes that took your bike, how he ended his career.
Oh, well,
Was it him or somebody else?
it's not my story, but this guy, Orman Wimberly,
It was Mormon.
I found out this much later, but he's still in prison today for murder. He is.
Oh, the one who took your bike?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Smug as a detail. Yeah. Well, thank you all for coming. Very helpful.